feeling great. How are you feeling? This is the Sara Carter podcast, and I'm coming to you from the beautiful studios here at Radio America in Arlington, where you still can only walk outside with 3 people or be fined $400. They don't want anybody walking in groups. Remember that. We are trying to keep our COVID distance, and apparently we can only be a family of 3 now. So if you got a family of 4, you got to keep the little one further behind you. Behind, all the way behind. Just keep a tracking device on your kids and you will be able to locate them in Arlington. Otherwise, you will be fined $400. Okay, maybe I'm over exaggerating this right now, but who knows? I'm sure there are families out there that have been fined. This is the times we live in. And I'm actually in a really good mood today because the anticipation is over. It is over. You know what I'm talking about. You know where I'm going with this. Maybe you don't. Joe Biden has selected his president. Literally. This is, yeah, okay. Joe Biden, former vice president, has selected his president for the Democratic National Party. Kamala Harris. She is a chameleon, folks. She can be anything you want her to be, which is why she was selected. Because we know that the radical left, that these liberal radical leftists that are so desperate to implement all of their new amazingly weird policies on America, like the crazy Green Deal that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was touting, socialized medicine, all the things that are un-American, basically everything that America should oppose, they want to implement. And they're hoping to do it through Trojan horse Biden and Kamala Harris. And so I'm okay with that because I think we're smart enough to know what's going on here. And as Americans, we can see right through this because thank God we live in a country that's free. And although the mainstream media is, definitely for the most part, against President Trump, we still have a media throughout this country that is willing to expose and tell the truth. And so we live in a society that's free because we have President Trump. We don't need to worry about that. We're going to get the truth out. People are going to see what's going to happen. And hopefully come November, the American people will make the decision that we need to make, right? We need to get out there and vote. We need to do the right thing. And I'm telling you, the right thing is not Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. All you have to do is look at what they stand for, look at what policies they have spoken openly about. Kamala has been very vocal, which is really weird, about defunding police. I want to play a clip for you. This is Seattle's police chief, Carmen Best. She is African American. She is frustrated and angry with what is happening in the United States of America, particularly in her city of Seattle. And I want you to think about what Kamala Harris has said about defunding and restructuring the police. Listen to Chief Best here, and then we'll talk about it.
This is not about the money, and it certainly isn't about, the demonstrators. I mean, be real, I have a lot thicker skin than that. It really is about the overarching lack of respect for the officers, the men and women who work so hard day in and day out. And honestly, the idea of after we work so incredibly hard to make sure that our department was diverse, that reflects the community that we serve, to just turn that all on a dime and hack it off without having a plan in place to move forward, it's highly distressful for me. And I really, it goes against my principles and my conviction, and I really couldn't do it.
She resigned. She's not the only officer, the only police chief across the United States that is now struggling with this and wanting to resign. Many have resigned. Many people are walking away from the job because they don't feel that they're going to get the support that they need from their lawmakers, or in some cases, even their city councils or their local governments, that they are just going to be abandoned. And I want you to think about your own community and who you call, right? When things are tough, or when something happens, somebody tries to rob your home, when there's a domestic disturbance, if somebody tries to steal your vehicle, or if someone has stolen your vehicle, if something happens, if there's a car wreck, think about your own community. Think about your schools and your children. Who do you call? You call your first responders. You call your local police force. They are not the enemy. They are human beings just like you and I. They are fathers and mothers. They are brothers and sisters. They are members of our community. Just like Chief Best said, what happened to George Floyd was wrong. There are bad apples. But overall, for the most part, our first responders and our law enforcement personnel are above par. They do the job not for the big paychecks, because believe me, they do not make money doing this. They do not get paid what they should be paid. They do it because they care about their communities. They care about you. They care about keeping people safe. It's just in their genetics. I can tell you this because that's how my husband is. Military, always wanted to be in the military. At 17, joined the military, spent his whole life and career in the military. And you think, why would someone do this? Go overseas, continually battling, continually fighting the enemy. You think about police officers constantly out on the front lines. They deal with things that we can't even imagine. I've talked to officers about this so many times. Suicides, drug addiction, child abuse, domestic violence, walking into a home and finding, children, babies in filth, and sometimes finding their parents dead with a needle in their arm, and kids, starving because they haven't had food. Imagine seeing that all the time on the job. And then just imagine all the good stuff too. Going to the schools and having the barbecue with the students and talking to the kids. And, the Kansas City police sent me this awesome video where they went to the schools and they were singing Baby Shark, and, the kids all joined in. Or when, local cops go to the Boys and Girls Club, or a fire department does that and, volunteers their time with children in urban communities where the police are needed most. That's why today I have Dean Cain. Okay, I know all the women out there, you're like, oh my gosh, Sara, he's so hot. I know. Trust me. Don't tell Dean that, though. He gets a big head. We don't want to talk about that. But Dean is such an amazing human being. He is a superstar in real life. He cares. He cares about police officers. He cares about the community. He is like the real life Superman. He will tell you that the real Supermen and women are in the police force, and how they in real life sacrifice so much for their communities. And the tragedy is that so many of them have been harmed by what's happened in our society recently. And so many people have been faced actually with some really difficult challenges. Some of them don't even know if they want to be cops anymore. So Dean has made it his mission to go out and draw attention to the great work that many of our law enforcement officials have done. And I want to tell you a little bit about this. He was actually in Idaho recently, in Pocatello, and he added his name to their police force. He was actually inducted as a deputy in Idaho, and I'm going to be with Dean. So probably when you hear this, it may have already happened. And Christy Swanson, I think you all probably remember her. She's Dean's really great friend, an actress who's a great friend of mine from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, if you remember that. And Dean is going to be in Winchester, Virginia this week, and he will be inducted as a sheriff into the sheriff's department in Winchester. So he's hoping that all of this attention that he's drawing to law enforcement officials is going to open up our eyes and kind of unify, which I think it will, our nation. We have been way too divided. We need to take a step back, and we need to teach our young children and our teenagers and our young people that the police officers are not the enemy. Sure, there are some things we need to do better. We need to have more discussion. We need to be more open about what's been happening in our communities, and particularly with the concerns of community members that maybe fear law enforcement. But I think a lot of that has to do with politicizing what we've seen happen, particularly recently with George Floyd's death. You know, everybody that I spoke to after George Floyd was killed by the officer said it was horrific, said it never should have happened. It didn't matter what color or where you were from or what job you had. Anybody I spoke with couldn't believe how horrific that was. But we saw how politicized it's become. I believe George Floyd's legacy has been hijacked. We've seen this escalate beyond George Floyd into riots and protests in our city streets that have nothing to do with his death. We are tearing each other apart. We are tearing our communities apart. Look at what is happening in Portland. Over 60 days of rioting and destruction in the city of Portland. We're seeing what's happened in Seattle. We're seeing what's happening in Chicago. We're seeing the defunding or the request to defund police across the country in certain urban areas that need it most. So thankfully, we have Dean Cain on with us today. I am so grateful that he is here. He's a good friend. He's called me his Lois Lane. I just wanted to throw that out there because it made me smile. And I'm happy to bring him on so he can talk about what it means to not only stand up for law enforcement officials in such a divisive time, but how he feels about being inducted as sheriff of Winchester County, Virginia.
Sara, you're not just my Lois Lane. You are the real life version of Lois Lane. I said this before because your career, the things that you've reported on, the way you've done it, has been amazing to me. And you really are the embodiment of Lois Lane. Now, you don't throw yourself in trouble all the time so Superman can come save you. You don't need that part, but you are that intrepid investigative reporter. And I have such tremendous respect for you.
Oh, well, hey, I could have used Superman's help in Afghanistan and Iraq a few times. So yes. I definitely, there's only so much that one person can do alone. And sometimes we do put ourselves in precarious situations. But we first met, just so everybody out there, so you all know how Dean and I met, when Christy Swanson and you both decided to take on the character roles of Peter Strzok and Lisa Page in this amazing on-stage version of the real life text messages of the FBI lovebirds. So just so everybody remembers, Peter Strzok was fired from the FBI and Lisa Page left the FBI. She was the lawyer, but it was those text messages between Peter and Lisa that actually led Congress to a lot of the information of what was happening inside the FBI with the Russia hoax investigation. And so you did an amazing job. You and Christy were incredible up on stage. And since then, I was always a fan, but I have become like a friend and even a greater fan of everything that you do, Dean. And then we'll get into all of the great stuff that you're doing right now for our law enforcement.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Sara. You couldn't say anything nicer. And Christy Swanson, brilliant and lovely. And the FBI lovebirds undercovers, that whole thing, the actual text messages between Peter Strzok and Lisa Page are just so damning as to their motives and the way they were treating things. And he was the head of the whole Russia investigation. And I think there's still a lot more to come out on those two. And I think it's going to be interesting. So we'll see where that goes. But there, a lot of people in Hollywood, not many actors wanted to take on those roles. Yeah,
that's really difficult. You bring up a really good point, Dean. I mean, being a conservative to a sense of actor and, being outspoken, how has that been in Hollywood? How have you handled that?
Well, for me, I'm a grown man. I'm 54 years old, and I just have always my opinions and my feelings, maybe on a few issues, have changed a little bit over time. The more I've traveled the whole world and seen all kinds of things and met with all kinds of people. Lived in Europe I've had a home there for 20 years, and I'm everywhere. I traveled to 23 countries 2 years ago, maybe 15 last year. I'm always traveling. I'm always seeing things, and my opinions have evolved over time to some degree, but most of it is based on the way I was raised, strong family values, honesty, integrity, these sorts of things. I'm a small government guy. I've always felt that way. And so I've just been, over the years, becoming a little bit more and more vocal about the things that I believe in, as I think happens when you raise a child and you start worrying about what that future for your child is going to be, and then teaching them morality and teaching them about the world. And I think that it's been that sort of slow drip of understanding that, there's a saying, you may not be interested in politics, but I promise you politics are interested in you.
Wow, that is so true. That is so true. You can't get away from it.
People in Hollywood tend to, I'll discuss, and I want to discuss these things with anyone. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, other people in Hollywood, they don't want to discuss those things. They just get very emotional and angry and start calling you names real fast.
Yeah, they do not want to talk about it. I mean, they really have a visceral hate for President Trump. A large number of people. I mean, I am surprised at how strong that hatred is, coming from members of Hollywood, where you would think like, actors are supposed to be more open-minded. They're supposed to, take in what's happening, be more empathetic. There is no empathy at all when it comes to the president or his family. And it's really interesting because even if they target him and say, he's wealthy, he was a billionaire, he doesn't understand this. Well, they're millionaires too. I mean, a lot of them. And so I've always found that quite stunning, and also how they just lock people out of Hollywood completely when they no longer think that they're all on the same page. It's a very monolithic type of thought process.
No question about it. And, and if you get on the wrong side of a couple people, they, in the old days, they could pretty much stop you from working. Nowadays, there's just way too many places to work and too many things going on. So I don't think that is the case as much. Maybe for a younger actor it is, but for someone of my age and experience, I can find work and I can do things. And I want to do projects that I enjoy, but sometimes I'll do a project that I don't agree with the message so much, or this or that, because I'm an actor and I work. I host a lot of things. I do a lot of different things. I produce a lot of things, and I've been able to stay very busy. But I think it's as a young person, I wouldn't have delved into politics and said so much, because people now, if I post something that's political on Twitter, that bastion of free speech.
So true. Gosh.
That I catch so many attacks, and they're all personal attacks. And I consider that a victory when I get there. And that's the same thing that goes on with the president. They don't talk policy. I want to talk policy. I'm not going to go and defend the president's character, because that's not my job. Right. I defend policy. I love what happened today. The fact that there was that agreement between Israel and the UAE that was wonderful. That's a huge deal. I've been to the UAE. I've been to Israel, and this is all very recently too. And it's just a gigantic, wonderful thing. But people don't see that. They don't see that. They see, oh, he's mean and he says mean things, and that's they just want to attack him personally. So I've never seen the kind of vitriol. And in Hollywood, that's celebrated right now. That's the thing to say, to be cool. Pick on Trump, and that's cool. You're part of the cool people club. And that's just ridiculous, in my opinion. As someone who supports the rule of law, who supports law enforcement and our military, and I understand completely that if you don't have safety and security, you have nothing within your civilization.
Well, that brings up a really important point, because you've made it your mission to now really bring your support to the men in blue, right? To our law enforcement community that has been through so much. I talk about it at the beginning of the show. We saw what happened with George Floyd. It was horrific. It was horrible. But that isn't endemic across the table in the United States. I mean, law enforcement officers, and I've said this over and over again, come in every religion, every color, every nationality. I've met people from other countries that have come here, become citizens, and then go into law enforcement. And when you're desperate, when something is wrong in our communities, and when maybe we feel threatened, the first people we call are first responders, our law enforcement officers. They're the first people to arrive, to put their lives on the line for us in our communities. And they're a part of our community. Talk a little bit about this mission of yours to really draw attention to law enforcement and to law enforcement officials across the country, because I think we're doing a disservice to our young people, particularly those people that are going after our men in blue.
I think we're doing a terrible disservice to our law enforcement, our men and women in blue. I think it's absolutely terrible. and I've said this before too, but it definitely bears repeating. There's so much anti-police rhetoric out there, but when any of these people spouting that stuff, when they feel that their life is threatened and they need a hero, they will dial 911 and a police officer will show up. And they will help them. They're not going to ask them their political affiliations or their religion. They're going to help them out of danger. It's what law enforcement officers are trained to do. Now, everyone's talking about defund the police and this, that. That's the most ridiculous thing in the world. That leads to anarchy, chaos, and vigilantism, and it would not be a good thing. We've seen.
Look at what happened in Portland.
Of course. It's ridiculous. Look at New York.
Right.
I mean, it's just awful. It's just awful. And there's example after example. So I say the opposite. I say put more funding toward police. Police officers, like the training that they receive, they have to be everything. They have to be the social worker. They have to be an EMT. They have to be able to be, psychologists and psychiatrists when they're going on domestic calls. It's so difficult. Their job is so difficult. I would say instead of defunding the police, put more money towards the police. Add social workers in there if you want them. The police officers would be only too happy to not have to deal with a domestic violence situation. They want to be there to make sure it's secure. Let the social workers go in there and deal with it. Let psychologists, psychiatrists deal with that. Fantastic. If there's force necessary, police officers are there to provide that ultimate force if necessary. No police officer that I know, and I know a lot, want to use force. They don't want to. It's the last resort. Our use of force training is so, especially in Pocatello, Idaho, where I'm a reserve officer there. Our use of force training and our chief is so specific about the way to do things. But if we had more money and more training, that's the answer. It's not the opposite. When they talk about reimagining the police, reimagine the police and policing community-based and give them more money and more respect. Have more things happening between young people and the police officers. One of the things in Pocatello that we do that's so wonderful, I played football forever. I was a professional football player for 15 minutes, but I played for 13 years to get there. And I love football and I love, the young people and the whole, I love being around the sport of football. Well, the Pocatello Police Department is very, very tight with the local college right there, Idaho State, the Bengals, and they're like mano a mano, and it's fantastic. So those young people look to the police officers and Chief Shy. They look at our guys and they go like, these are my guys. They're here for us. They're here to community police with us, for us. And they had a big march together when all this took place with George Floyd, and they called it a unity march, and it was organized by the students. That's the kind of stuff we need to have, that sort of respect for police officers and policing, and that sort of dialogue and that sort of juxtaposition, that interlinking between the community and the police officers. And that's why I became a police officer.
What do you think happened, Dean? What do you think happened? Like, when you talk to other officers, you're a reserve officer, when you've talked to the folks in Pocatello, Idaho, and in other parts of the country, and we'll get to Winchester County soon, but when you talk to officers and they see young people marching in the streets, anarchists, Antifa, Black Lives Matter, when they see young kids holding signs that have expletives saying F the police. I saw a little girl, maybe 4 years old or 5 years old, walking with a sign with her mother, F the police. That kind of anger and hatred, that breakdown in what is civil society. What are the cops saying? I don't even understand where this is coming from unless there are people and groups that really want to break the backbone of this civil society of America.
Well, I think that obviously the little kid walking through with the sign, that's not anything the kid came up with on their own. That's taught by the parents, and it's awful. But I'll bet you that parent, if something happened awful right there and their life was threatened, they'd call 911, ask for a police officer. And again, a police officer would show right up and do their very best to secure their safety, because that's what they do. I honestly don't know what people are thinking. There's some anger out there, and there's a lot of people who are opportunists, and they're capitalizing on this as well. So there's a lot of anger, and that's fair. Anger is fair. So if you want to change policing, and this is another thing that I say often, if you want to change the policing in your community, if you're unhappy with the way the police in your community, join them. Get a job, become a police officer, get involved. That's what I've done. And so when people are like, well, why don't you do it? Well, I have. I have, and I'll do it again and again and again, because I think that's the important and the solution to solving sort of that problem of policing. It's not us versus them. It's all of us together. We're trying to do this for you and with you. We want to provide security, and that's just it. And I think that people are teaching their youth the wrong thing. It's not an us versus them thing. We are together, and we all want peace and we want safety.
Right. I think that's what's so amazing about what you're doing right now and drawing attention to such an important and critical issue, especially with law enforcement officials. We're going to be together. Actually, it's going to be tomorrow, and
Yes.
you are going to be inducted. You're actually going to be inducted as a sheriff, right? A reserve sheriff in
No, I'll be a sheriff's deputy.
A full sheriff's deputy. Okay. So explain a little bit about that and how that came about. I'm really excited. I'm going to be posting, just so everybody knows, pictures on Instagram, tweeting about Dean Cain. We're going to be having a great time. Christy Swanson's going to be there. I'm very, very excited to see this happen. Talk a little bit about how that happened and tell me how you do it. I mean, do you go out there and serve when you're out there, or what do you do?
Well, okay, so I'm part of a foundation called the Crimes Against Children Foundation. Daryl Williams is the head of our foundation, and Daryl, who happens to be a black man and a police officer not forever, he's not that old. He'll get on me for that. He recruited me in, and the foundation focuses on anti-bullying, anti-suicide, community relations within policing, crimes against children, sex trafficking, human trafficking, online bullying, online safety, these sorts of things. And he asked me if I wanted to be a part of this, and we were friends, and we talked about this for a long time. And Eric Estrada does a lot with this foundation as well, and so I've known Eric forever, and he's a wonderful guy and tremendously close with law enforcement and an officer himself, for sure, way before me. And he was an inspiration to me. And when Daryl asked me if I wanted to be part of it, I said yes. And we work. Our same foundation will be here in Winchester, in Virginia, and we will work to better community relations. We will work to fight online bullying and community relations between police officers, the sheriff's department, and the local community. I'll do all kinds of public relations things for them, but I'll also be there. If there's something they got to do when we have to roll, then I'm a sheriff's deputy. I go through all sorts of training. I got 8 hours of training to do today on Pocatello. So we have all sorts of training we go through, and of course firearms training, and we have to pass our post testing and things of that nature all the time, which is great fun for me. I enjoy that, and safety is job one. And so I could be out there. Depends on what's going on. I could be there, knocking on doors.
That's so cool. Could you imagine? Can you imagine now you're sitting at home, you're calling the police because you see something going on in your neighborhood, and Dean Cain shows up at your door in his uniform?
I am not Superman, so bullets do not bounce off me. None of that stuff happens. But my job, and the way I look at it, and always our job, is to de-escalate. Right. So if someone just happens to be like in a bad situation, be like, hey man, you're Dean Cain. Fine. If that's what it takes to de-escalate the situation, beautiful. Let's do it.
I think that's awesome. I think that's awesome. And I really, with the foundation, I think this is so important because it's something I truly care about, especially child trafficking, human trafficking, online safety, all of those issues. This is something that parents, please educate yourselves on this. Our children are so vulnerable, especially on the internet. And this work, I'm so excited to hear that you're involved in this. I would love to be involved in it. If you ever need anything, if I could be any help, Dean, just let me know.
You did it. You opened the door. Everybody heard it.
That's right. You're right. He's taking notes now, folks. He's taking notes. Where can people get involved? Can they go online and with their local police force? What can we do to really get the message out so that we become a part of the solution and not part of the problem?
Well, certainly speak with your local police departments. That's for sure. That's where it all starts. Community policing. Also, just on the everyday, when you see a police officer, and I do this every single time I see them, I wave, I say hello, and I thank them. And I'll tell you what that does to police officers' morale. It brings them up so much because I talked to so many officers within California or elsewhere, and then I said, how you feeling? How are things going? And some my friends in New York are all wanting out. In California, I was talking to a California Highway Patrol guy because I was actually helping somebody on the side of the road, an older gentleman, and the officer stopped and asked what was going on. And I told him what was happening with the guy, and he said, thanks. And I said, how are you doing? What's going on? He was like, it's a weird time. He'll be driving his motorcycle and people will be screaming at him and cussing at him. Some people will be spitting on him, and then some people will be waving. So it's a weird time for these people, and these men and women are heroes. So for us, if you want to help us, the Crimes Against Children Foundation, CACF, we're just coming out with sort of all of our goodies and our stuff. I don't think we're online just yet, but I can give you a lot more information tomorrow because Daryl will be here with me later
Absolutely.
tonight.
We're going to get that up on the website. That's at SaraCarter.com. We're going to get everything up on our website about the Crimes Against Children Foundation so that you will all have access to that and be able to give of yourself to help build our country again, right, Dean? I mean, this ripping each other apart is getting us nowhere. Let's start lifting each other up and say hello to an officer who's protecting your neighborhood and let people know that, that we're all Americans. We shouldn't be ripping each other apart.
100%. That's exactly the message, Sarah. 100%. I think if we start doing that, if you say hello to an officer and say hi and talk to them, you realize they're someone's dad, someone's grandfather, someone's uncle, someone's brother, husband, and you go, oh, wow, it's just a regular person. It's like, when you meet, military and soldiers, and I know you know a lot about this, right. Obviously people think, oh my gosh, they're soldiers. That say thank you and I appreciate you and talk to them. They're regular human beings who just happen to be, sheepdogs and
right.
Look out for other people and care for other people. And it's a wonderful thing. So please say hello and thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Dean, for being on. Can I bring you back on the show so we can get into more details about the Crimes Against Children Foundation? I'd really love that.
You can bring me up for anything, Sarah. You're my Lois Lane.
Oh, I love that. You guys heard it here first at the Sara Carter podcast. Dean Cain, I couldn't thank you enough. You're amazing. I'm going to make sure to point people in the right direction, and we'll have all of that up on our website so that people know where to go and they know what to do and who to donate to.
Thanks, Sarah.
Wow, that was just so much fun. It was so great to talk to Dean. I hope you all got a lot from that because there is so much that he is doing, and it's so important what he's saying, that we need to find resolution to what's happened in our country, particularly the divide between law enforcement and our citizens in the major cities, because I don't believe this is endemic across the entire country. I've got to believe that there's small towns in America, all across America, whether it's in the Midwest or even the West Coast or the East Coast, where people care about their officers, where they care about each other. We are not all tearing each other apart like we're seeing in Portland, Oregon. But what's happening in Portland and Seattle and Chicago, in some areas, where those things can spill over. They can spread if we don't put a stop to it. Why are we tearing each other apart? I was devastated this weekend when I saw this story. It's actually one of the most horrific things I can even imagine, having this happen to a child of mine, and particularly it's a 5-year-old child playing in the front yard on a bicycle. His name is Cannon Hinot, and I'm hoping that I'm pronouncing his last name correctly. Beautiful, beautiful 5-year-old boy riding his bicycle. And a man, a next-door neighbor, comes out and literally executes him on the front lawn in front of his family. I don't even know how that can be real, why that happened, if this man was crazy. I don't even care. The fact that a 5-year-old child was executed tells me something is drastically wrong in our country. That something is so wrong that all of us need to grow the hell up. We need to stop calling each other names. We need to stop and think about what we are doing to one another. We need to hold our mainstream media accountable, sure. Why aren't they saying his name? It should be anybody, whether it's George Floyd being choked out in the middle of the street in this horrific killing, or a 5-year-old riding his bicycle in the front yard. We should be outraged. And it has nothing to do with the color of our skin. It has to do with the content of our heart and our nation and our spirit. What type of people are we? What are we doing for George Floyd? Are we doing anything for George Floyd or poor Cannon or any of the other children that have been killed in drive-by shootings or executed by gang members in Chicago or on the streets of Seattle or in New York City? What are we doing to each other? It's no wonder our children don't even believe us. We can't even act like adults. We can't even find some common ground with one another to resolve our own crisis. Sometimes I don't even want to look in the mirror. It's embarrassing. It's wrong. We are responsible for the future of this country, and we are responsible for what we do to one another. And we are all responsible for what happens from here on out. Because what is happening in our streets should not be happening in one of the greatest nations on planet Earth. We are doing it to each other, people. There is no one to blame. Not President Trump, not former Vice President Joe Biden, not Kamala Harris, not former President Barack Obama. No one but ourselves. No one but ourselves. It's going to take each one of us to make a conscious decision to stop, take a deep breath, and get back to where we need to be, have common sense and love one another and find a way to resolve this crisis before it's too late, before we destroy each other and destroy our nation. Thank you so much for being a part of the Sara Carter Show. I appreciate every moment I spend with you. Remember, you can follow me on Twitter at Sara Carter DC. You can find me on YouTube under Sara Carter. Follow me on Parler. Parler's always an option at Sara Carter Official. Subscribe and give us a 5-star rating on your podcast app, whether that's Apple, Spotify, Spreaker, whatever it is. Go ahead and subscribe. I'm always listening. I'm always reading all of your messages. It means a lot to me when you send us some tips or stories or just tell us how you feel. And thank you for being with me today. Remember, this is the Sara Carter Podcast, and we are taking the story back.